Hi everyone, welcome to Free Movement Sewing. So today in this course, what you're going to learn is you're going to actually learn how to make alterations to your own apparels. Now that being said, when you think about making alterations to apparels, a lot of the time people just think about cutting up stuff, adding up stuff, and just trying to make them bigger or smaller or shorter and longer. But particularly in this course, what I'm going to talk about is I'm going to help you to think, to visualize, to understand the concept so that you can make alterations successfully and smartly, but most importantly, to be able to visualize and foresee potential problems. Now that being said, a lot of the times we work with different fabrics, and because there's so many different fabrics to think about, we always have to make sure that we are on top of that and we understand the fabrics before we go in to cut things up, add things together, or make things smaller, shorter, using different machines, using different seams to try and make things happen for us. Before things can happen for us, we need to understand the apparels, understand how it's being made, and really be able to look into it, see it, and be able to dissect it such that by the time you're done with your alterations, it's gonna look great, it's gonna fit great, it's gonna feel great. Now, have you ever brought an apparel to perhaps a seamstress or someone that does alterations, and coming back to it, you go like, oh my goodness, I really don't like that, or I really don't like how that looks? That's because when it comes to making alteration, your heart needs to go into it as well. You need to think about how you can actually make this whole apparel look better, fit better, feel better, whether it's yourself wearing the apparels or someone else wearing the apparels. Now bear in mind, this is not just about how professional you are, but this is also about how much heart you're going to put inside all of these alterations to make sure that it comes out to be in a much better place for that dancer or for that person wearing it. Now, I know I'm going a lot into it, but bear in mind, alright, there are many different fabrics out there that we have to work with. And with different fabrics, we need to understand whether or not things can be taken apart, or can this fabric not be taken apart. Things like that would make a difference, because if you're talking about, softer fabrics, they are more delicate, there's a certain way to deal with that. And if you're talking about other fabrics that are not as delicate, of course, we'll talk about that as well. So what you're going to see in this particular sewing course is you will see that we have an apparel with different types of fabrics. And I'm going to show you how to actually understand the fabrics and create the alterations from there. Whether or not you want to make it bigger, smaller, longer, shorter, whatever it is that you're trying to do. But to understand it first so that you can think, visualize, plan to see what exactly you want to do with this particular apparel to make it still look amazing and fit the person well. Now, the last thing you want to happen is to go through everything and make the alterations, and then the costume or the apparel still looks like crap, right? You want to make sure that by the end of it, not only does it fit, but it's gonna look great, and most importantly, you can still decorate the apparel if you want. Now, if you are as excited as me to get started, let's go ahead to learn how to make alterations to apparels. And I know that you're gonna learn so much from this course, because honestly it took me years and years to actually understand this and learn it, and I would have loved to learn it from someone else too. So I went through all of that hardship, I've went through the days and nights and months and years of sewing to get here to where I am today, and here I have today to share with you all the tips and tricks that I have when I'm thinking, when I'm sewing with my hands, and how I actually manage all the different aspects of this. So let's get started sewing. And remember, if you have any questions, feel free to ask us. Alright? Ask me, ask anyone of us here. We have a whole community here to support you, so always make sure that whether you are sewing for leisure or if you're sewing for business, I'm definitely here to support you in all of your ventures. So just saying that if you're sewing this for business, you can definitely actually charge your clients for alterations. And I'm not saying that you should make alterations very cheap, because it's a lot of work, so bear that in mind. And if you're here to learn how to make alterations, whether it's for your daughter, for yourself, or for any of your practice wear, this is going to be the perfect course for you. So I'll see you in the next chapter, and let's get started sewing. Let's go! let's just see what we have over here. So over here, I have a costume that we've just made not too long ago. And this is a top with a lot of different fabrics going on here. All right, this is a men's top, but it goes the same whether it's men or women's top. All right. And what we're going to first understand is we're first going to look at how we're going to make sense of this costume. And after making sense of it, how we are actually going to look at alteration for this costume. All right, so I'm going to talk about different types of alterations, what you can do with the costume, what you're looking for, because all of that's going to make a lot of a difference. All right, so certain things that you're going to look at in terms of how you want to alter it, it could be you want to make the neck wider, you want to make the chest wider, you want to make the waist wider, you want to make the sleeves shorter, you want to make the sleeves longer, you know, many different ways to do the alterations. But today for this particular costume, what we want to do is we actually want to expand, all right, the chest area of the costume. Okay, by the chest area, I'm actually talking about this area over here. So in terms of expanding this, okay, before we're actually going to go into that, let us first try and understand this costume. Bear in mind that I also have all the spare fabrics over here, you know, what we're going to use to actually make the costume a little bit bigger. These are the same fabrics here, it's the same colors, and you want to make sure that you always get enough fabric such that you have actually some spares. Okay, that's really important. You can see how all of the sequins are actually dropping, right, from the spare fabrics. So that's also one thing to consider, yeah? So let's just talk about what we have over here. For this particular costume, you're seeing many different types of fabrics. The reason why we actually use so many different types of fabrics is because we really wanted to spice up the costume in that sense, because this is a very, very special costume for him, because it's his first performance costume. So I really wanted to make sure that we use different types of fabrics to create this piece over here. All right, so let's just talk about the fabrics we have here, because when you're making alterations, the first and foremost thing you need to understand would be the fabrics before you even touch anything or think of how you're going to make the alterations. All right, so let's see. Over here at the top, okay, we have the collar. So this black piece and this black piece and this black piece over here, right? These are all just standard 4-way stretch spandex, and we're going to test that by stretching this side and stretching this side along the grain line. Okay, so I know that this is spandex, this is spandex, this is spandex. This is actually faux leather over here. All right, so there is some stretch, but there's not a lot of stretch. All right, and then what we also have is we also have red spandex over here. So you can see, all right, the grain line is actually running down. So I'm going to stretch it to show you it's 4-way stretch spandex. And over here, we actually have the metallic spandex, all right? So this and this are actually the same one. So I'm going to show you this to stretch it so you can see. Stretching this. So again, this is 4-way stretch spandex, yeah? And then of course, we have the black faux leather over here as well. So I'm going to stretch this to show you, right? And then over here in this piece, this was actually a pre-made ribbon piece, okay? And then we added on some extra embellishments, to make it a lot shinier, and some rhinestones just to pull the whole look together. And I think in general, this made the whole costume, this area made the whole costume very special and different, which is what I like, all right? But what happens and why we actually need to do alterations to this costume is because number one, we have, if you see over here, many lines running through, right? And if you see how these are all sewn in a straight line. And straight lines do not have much stretch. Well, there's still some stretch, but with straight lines, it means that the stretch is actually less. And because we are actually doing diagonal lines over here, it reduces the stretch even more, all right? But that's not a problem, you know, that's just a design. Right, we could have used a zigzag stitch, but a straight line would have looked a lot nicer. So therefore, straight lines, right? So by understanding this area over here, you will understand why there's less stretch going on. It's not that the fabrics don't have stretch. All of the fabrics have stretch, and in fact, all of the fabrics are 4-way stretch fabrics, okay? But because of the design, it is reducing the stretch of the costume. All right. So if I were to pull this, I can definitely still see stretch, but you can see the restrictions going on with all of these lines over here. Can you see that? There's a lot of restrictions, okay? I'm not saying there's no stretch, still is, but there could have been more stretch, okay? So, am I missing any other fabrics? Oh yes, sorry. There's also the sequins over here, okay? If you see the side panel as well as the sleeves, all right? I really like this area over here because of how much it brings out the look of the costume. Because a lot of the time you kind of miss out the sides, and actually the sides are really important, you know, when you're creating a costume. So this costume here, we actually have the sequin panel over here. And again, these sequin panels are four-way stretch. All right, four-way stretch sequins. Very pretty. I love these black sequins. They are single colored sequins, so it looks really great, and they are based on mesh. Okay, I'll just show you the spare fabric over here. Is this one layer? Yes. So you can see this is actually a mesh fabric with four-way stretch. Having understood this, okay, we are then going to turn this top around so that you can see the back. So this is the back of the costume over here. Now, question. When you see the back of the costume, okay, what exactly do you notice now? In my mind, what I'm thinking about is how does the person wear this apparel? And I'm also thinking about the design and why the design is of a certain way. Okay, so let's talk about how the person wears this apparel. Evidently, there is an invisible zip going on over here that runs down, but it does not cut off to the bottom of the top. That means this top can be open, but it doesn't cut off at the bottom here this way, right? That means the zip, you cannot open this whole piece out open, so you still have to wear it through the head and then pull the zip up, right? That's one thing. So that's the function of the top, how you're wearing it. The second thing I'm going to think about, right, would be these lines going on here. So when you're creating a costume and when you're doing a pattern, there's a reason why you're actually doing this cut-in lines over here, right? So this cut-in lines here for the sequin area to transition to this black spandex area, this line here actually creates an illusion of a slimmer waist. This cut-in line over here. Okay, so imagine if you don't have this cut-in line and it's completely just a straight line in. It's not going to look as flattering because it makes your waist look bigger, but if you have these cut-in lines over here, okay, this actually makes the person's waist slimmer. So that makes a lot of a difference, yeah? So imagine without these lines, it's just going to look very flat, but you realize that's why for a lot of tops, you actually see darts, or you actually see like lines coming down this way, just to create like a smaller waist, which is always nice, yeah? And then from looking at the sleeves, all right, the sleeves in the back and the front are actually the same, so nothing much over there, okay? But if you realize, okay, I'm going to look at the back now. I'm looking at this area over here, yeah? This back area is completely black. The front area, however, has lots of different designs going on, right? You realize that? So I've got the horizontal lines, I've got these lines going on over here, I've got my V shape, I've got a centerpiece which brings the costume out, right? When the audience actually sees this costume from the front, amazing. Lots of things going on. When I flip it to the back, fortunately or unfortunately, it actually does look very plain, right? Okay, so that's one thing I can already immediately see from this. Yeah, I'm not talking about the sleeves, I'm just talking about the back because I think the sleeves look amazing. Yeah, because you've got the faux leather here, the sequins here, the red spandex here, followed by the faux leather, sequins, spandex. So I think the sleeves look amazing. So I'm not going to even touch that, but just looking at the back design, it does look a lot plainer. Okay, so this is how I typically like to analyze the costume first, understanding the costume, before we look at how we're going to make the alterations. So in the next chapter, I'm going to talk about how you're going to make the alterations where you're going to make the alterations if you're doing different kinds of alterations. Alright, so let's move on to the next chapter. Okay, now looking at this costume right now, we're going to talk about how you're going to make the alterations and where you're going to make the alterations. Okay, so let's talk about the simple part. If you're going to alter the sleeves, okay, if you look at the sleeves over here, right, we have so many different panels. Now if you're going to make the sleeves shorter, very simply, I would just cut this away, or cut however much that you want away from the sleeves, and just top stitch it down. Okay, or if you want to cut this whole panel away, just leave it with the full leather part. I think it still looks amazing. Okay, just depending on how much of the sleeves you want to cut off. I think in terms of the sleeves, it's actually really easy. So nothing too hard in terms of the alterations. Basically, you're just making it shorter, pulling it in, and then doing a top stitch. Okay, so that's just the sleeves if you want to make it shorter. Now, if you want to make it longer, okay, then you can just cut another panel of fabric. You could even cut the black spandex over here. Right, this black spandex over here, and then just add one more piece here, just serge it around, or just use a zigzag to top stitch it around and just finish it. So I think in terms of extending or shortening the sleeves is actually very simple for this particular costume. Right, but today what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about how we're actually going to make the chest area not so tight. Okay, now one thing I'm going to note now is that the side panels here are all full of sequins. See this beautiful black sequin fabric? I love it, right? But I'm also going to notice that when you're working with black sequin fabric that is on mesh, okay, the problem with it is if you actually unpick the seams, right, and reserge it, or re-sew it, a lot of the time the mesh and the sequins are going to run, or it's going to draw, or stuff like that. Already, you know, just by cutting it, I already see all of these sequins dropping down from the fabric, which is very normal for sequin fabrics, yeah? But the main thing is, how do we make sure that if we were to remove the side seams, right, and re-sew it back, how can it still look nice? The thing is, we can still control it, but a lot of the time I would prefer not to actually make alterations to mesh fabrics, and especially sequin fabrics, and in this case, sequin mesh fabrics, yeah? So that's the first thing. I'm looking at, if I want to increase the chest, a lot of the time is just to enlarge the side seam. The second thing I'm going to consider would be these metallic fabrics, yeah? So understanding metallic fabrics is one thing. So metallic fabrics, how it's actually made is that it's actually with standard fabric, and it's actually heat press printed on top of the fabric. So if you see like this particular color, or if you see like holographic colors, a lot of metallic fabrics are heat pressed onto the fabric. So is this one. So what that means is, if we were to create alterations, just cutting off the sides and putting onto this, what's going to happen is, it's actually like if we were to re-sew it, you know, it's actually not going to look very nice as well. So that's another thing to consider when you're working with metallic fabrics. As for the leatherette fabrics over here, like this one over here, it's actually not too bad because it's black, so it's not going to be as obvious if we were to sew as compared to, let's say, this dull gold metallic over here. So I think black is not so much of an issue. Black spandex is not an issue. Red spandex is also not an issue. So the main thing I'm really going to look at is the sequin fabric as well as the metallic gold fabric over here. And the rest of the fabrics are not too bad. We're not going to touch this centerpiece at all because, you know, it's going to be tough because we have the rhinestoning and all the other sequins going on over here, so we're not going to touch that. But basically we are going to do the alterations elsewhere. That's understanding the top. If we're going to open up the sides, the mesh might be an issue, okay, but if not, the metallic might be an issue as well. Now the other thing, if you flip the top inside out, you will see that this top is double lined. Okay, you can see it's double lined. And for the apparels that we make, okay, for couture, I like to make it double lined because I think it's a lot more flattering and it's a lot more comfortable. Might be sometimes for certain costumes we might just do one layer, but typically for double layer the overall fit actually looks way better. Okay, this would be the entire look of it for the front. And now let's turn over to the back. For the back area, okay, you will see that again the sequin side seams are still here in the same place. Okay, we have a plain black back and we have an invisible zipper going on over here, right? The invisible zipper right now stops over here. So same thing for the back, it is double lined. Let's look at how they actually sewed on the zipper. The zipper was sewn on, okay, after serging the sides, and then a straight stitch was sewn down here this way. Can you see that? To hold the invisible zipper in place. Now if you're not sure how to actually sew a zip, okay, you can check out other courses where we talk about that, but you must already know how to sew a zip, okay, to understand how to make alterations to this particular top. When I want to increase the chest to make this a little bit of a looser fit, okay, right now, considering that 1, there are double layers, 2, that, you know, there's mesh fabrics at the sides, and 3, that the back is plain, what I'm going to do then is I'm actually going to make alterations to this back area over here instead of the sides to increase the chest length. Okay, so that the circumference of the chest becomes bigger, but I'm not touching this fabric over here because I think the side panels being black sequins is actually really nice as well. So I don't really want to touch that, but I do think that this back area here is really plain. So this is where we can play with to make the alterations. Now that you've understood this, okay, I'm going to go ahead in the next chapter to talk about how we are actually going to do the alterations such that the entire piece becomes slightly more relaxed for the dancer wearing this, especially at the chest area. Okay, so that being said, let's talk about how we are actually going to alter this top to make sure that the chest fits much better. Before we do that, I'm going to understand that, you know, when you have to make alterations to the chest, it means that the front area over here, okay, the front width to be exact, okay, needs to also be lengthened slightly, okay. Reason why is because you want to make sure that mostly it is lengthened in the correct ratio. Okay, you don't have to touch the waist. The waist is going on over here. You don't have to touch the waist so much, but a little bit looser it's fine as well for this particular costume. But we're going to talk about the chest, okay? A lot of the time the easiest way is to actually just cut out the sides, add in an extra panel and then sew it together again. But for this costume, what we're going to do is we're actually going to create a design out of the alterations. Alright, what do I mean by that? Now, we're going to have to increase this area as well as this area over here because these are linked, right? The front width or the back width in this case and the chest circumference is linked. So you cannot just increase here and not care about here if it's tight, okay? You still need to consider the width over here, alright? Now, if you're not sure what I'm talking about, where's your chest, where's your front width, back width, and stuff like that, okay, go and check out other courses first because I'm not going to go through it here. That being said, right, what I now intend to do for this top to increase the chest width is to actually create some designs because the back is actually quite plain, but at the same time increase the overall chest circumference, okay? So first, let's look at where it is that we're going to alter. Now, we have an invisible zip going on over here, okay? We have a nice serge edge at the invisible zip over here, so I don't have to worry about the two fabrics running around, okay? Because this one has a lining fabric, right? So if I were to consider that, I would much prefer to make the alterations going on the center back. Center back is where the zip is, That would be my preference. Another way is I could create another design over here following this curve, but that would mean that I would actually have to touch the sequins, which is not what I want to do. Okay, and another way is I could always create another panel going on down over here, but bear in mind that I have 2 layers of fabrics to work with, so that's not something that I would particularly want to do as well. So the easiest way and the best way to create a design out of it as well, I would think, would be to create something that runs along this zip over here, such that I can remove this zip. I still have the serge edges, so I know that the fabric's not going to move, not going to run, and create a design out of that, and after that replace the fabric. Bear in mind that this will also mean that the collar would actually become slightly bigger, but in this case for him, he doesn't mind the collar being a little bit bigger, so that's great. Yeah. So looking at the designs first, okay, over here it looks really black. Over here in the front, you will see some red, you know, some gold and stuff like that. So bear in mind that for the spare fabric, what I have is I have enough red, I have enough black sequins, and I have enough black spandex. Okay, how I'm going to consider doing this is I would consider that, okay, if I were to expand the center back area using black, it's not going to make a difference in terms of the design. So I'm not going to choose black because, you know, it's not going to change the design anyway. So I might as well use a different color or different type. Now, I could use a mesh at the center back to increase, but it would mean sequin, sequin, sequin. So still not something that, you know, I would still prefer, right? And ultimately, this is a sequin mesh fabric, so I still have to put a black spandex underneath just to make it better. But to sew sequin to the zip, you know, sometimes it makes the zip a lot harder to maneuver and to use, so I prefer not to do that. So that leaves me with the red fabric. So if I were to run a red fabric up here this way, it would still kind of match the overall look in terms of the sleeves, to the waistband over here, to the other sleeve as well. So there will still be a little bit of a design, right? So what I've decided to do is I would then use red fabric to kind of add 2 panels over here to create an extra red panel, but at the same time, okay, expanding the costume. But when I do that, you know, it's going to be 2 red panels running down here this way. So while it can mimic the front, because the front has this panel going on over here, so the back, I think it's not going to be odd to suddenly add a red panel going on over here, because it kind of mimics that. So I think it still look generally good. But what I can do after that is, you know, because if it's going to be 2 red panels this way, I could mimic this look over here by creating some rhinestone lines. Alright, so that's one way to do it, and I think in terms of considering all of the fabrics and all the different types, that's exactly what I'm going to do. Because bear in mind that when you're working with different layers of fabric as well, this costume has many types of fabric, but you're also looking at layers of fabric, which means you have 2 layers over here. Okay, that's going to be the best way to make the alterations. If this costume were just one single layer, it would have been a lot easier to make the alteration, but because it isn't, I'm actually going to work on the back to increase it, okay? And then later, okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to remove this current zip first, open the back, add on an extra layer of red, and then re-sew on the zip again. And then perhaps after that, just do some rhinestoning work just to make the design look a lot more seamless. Alright, so at this point of time, if you have any questions, you can always let us know. But all in all, you just need to remember that when it comes to alterations, it is more than adding or reducing measurements. It's also the whole concept of understanding and bringing out the design even further, because you right now have the ability to do so. So while making alterations, it still has to come in together with the design, okay? So this is why we are very different in terms of what we do as compared to, say, regular seamstresses and tailors, say, that you find to do alterations, because for them, they just want to make it simple, fast, efficient. I'm not saying that this is going to take really long. Actually, it's actually quite fast to do it, but understanding it and conceptualizing it before you actually go in to do it makes a lot of difference as well. All right, so that being said, let's go ahead to remove the zip, and then after that create the patterns so that we can add an extra panel over here. The next chapter, we're going to talk about how much of a measurements we're going to add, and then we're going to go from there.